Today's Friday, August 17th. This is the Cowboys Beat on CLNS Media. I'm Ari Temkin. Starting next week, the Cowboys will finish up their training camp in beautiful Frisco, Texas, the Star, unbelievable complex, where I will be able to have access to all of the players. So stay tuned for next week's episode when they're back in Texas training at the Star in Frisco for plenty of player interviews as we will continue throughout the season. My name is Ari Temkin, and I am the pregame, postgame host for the Dallas Cowboys along 105.3 The Fan and the Dallas Cowboys Radio Network. Make sure to catch me before and after every single Dallas Cowboys game. And as the season has approached, and many analysts throughout the entire country start to make some prognostications of what this season will hold and make their predictions about the season, there seems to be a lot of people that are sleeping on the Dallas Cowboys. Many, like in years past, believe they're overrated, their talent is overstated, and most, at least from my vantage point, have picked either the Eagles or the Giants to be at the top of the NFC East this year. And I think even some have the Redskins finishing ahead of the Dallas Cowboys this season, which is absolute nonsense, but I digress. The national media and analysts is 100% sleeping on the Dallas Cowboys in 2018. Here's what's interesting, though. Pro Football Focus, who has created their own analytics to define and measure success and failure in football, whether you agree with their rankings or disagree with their rankings, they certainly have a reputation as being very, very good when it comes to measuring success and failure in football in the National Football League. At any rate, Pro Football Focus ranked the Cowboys as having the 8th best talent in the NFL. That's based on all of the players in their roster, how they've graded out, how they project to grade out within this season. 8th best in the NFL. Top 10 in the National Football League. So it's interesting that on the one hand, there's all these experts and analysts that are talking about the other teams in the division, and yet here is a unbiased, purely metric-driven ranking, at least in some ways, tells you that there's probably more talent on this roster than people are willing to give it credit. So for that reason, perhaps that reason alone, I decided on this week's episode to do the top 5 reasons for you as a Dallas Cowboys fan, and I'm assuming because you're listening to the Cowboys Beat that you are indeed a Cowboys fan. But I'm going to give you the top 5 reasons for the optimism for the Dallas Cowboys in 2018. In no particular order. But perhaps the number one reason for optimism in 2018 is their defensive line. In particular, DeMarcus Lawrence, who is coming off a 14.5 sack season, who has showed up to camp and looked every bit the monster that he was last year. And because the film on him will be huge and widespread throughout all offensive meeting rooms, teams, when they game plan for the Dallas Cowboys in 2018, are going to put extra attention on DeMarcus Lawrence, which is bad news for DeMarcus Lawrence, but really good news for Dorrance Armstrong, Cowboys 4th-round draft pick out of Kansas, who has been looks like a complete steal. He was, when I was at camp in Oxnard, California for a week, he was the best rookie I saw at camp. Great speed, great bend. I mean, just fantastic athleticism, but also pretty good size. It looks like a complete steal as a 4th-round pick. Randy Gregory, who's starting to practice now in pads, he looks like he's in fantastic shape. Taco Charlton, I'm not expecting a lot from him, but I mean, you're starting to talk about a pretty decent rotation of pass rushers, especially, again, because DeMarcus Lawrence is going to draw so much attention, it's going to open up some opportunities for Randy Gregory, for Dorrance Armstrong, for Taco Charlton, for David Irving when he ever comes back, if Coney Ely makes this team, or whoever else makes this football team. There's a lot of good players that can get after the quarterback, and as we saw in their Week 1 preseason game, they were really disruptive at the line of scrimmage against the 49ers. It's a preseason game, I know, but still, you bat 4 or 5 balls in the air at the line of scrimmage. That's impressive, especially if they can do it consistently. So the number one reason for optimism is DeMarcus Lawrence and that defensive line, specifically the defensive ends. Number 2 reason for optimism. In the Dak Prescott era, when Tyron Smith and Zeke Elliott are healthy and in the lineup, the Cowboys have a top 5 offense. That is statistically accurate. Cowboys are a top 5 offense in the Dak Prescott era when Tyron Smith and Zeke Elliott are healthy. The only time Dak Prescott hasn't been the quarterback of a top 5 offense since he's been a quarterback of an NFL offense was that second half of last season when Tyron Smith missed significant time with the back injury and then Zeke Elliott faced the 6-game suspension. The Cowboys were certainly not the same without Zeke, but I mean even more so Tyron Smith. When those guys are in the lineup, and Zeke will be in the lineup this year, Tyron Smith, if his back can hold up, when those guys are in the lineup with Dak Prescott, they have a top 5 offense, a major reason for optimism. And so much of that is because of their running game, the zone read attack they have. And yeah, now we've seen that in the past with different receivers, but again, the running game, the viability of the Zeke Elliott, Dak Prescott zone read just gives them such a dynamic threat, especially when it comes to scoring. Because as I've mentioned before, the Romo, Dez, back shoulder fade, which is basically automatic and indefensible in the red zone, the Dak Prescott, Zeke Elliott zone read is as indefensible in the red zone. Number 3, people have been questioning the creativity of Jason Garrett and Scott Linehan and the offensive machine. We have already seen more creativity from a personnel and a play-calling standpoint in one training camp than we've seen in the last 3-4 years, at least, of this Jason Garrett, but then lately Scott Linehan offense. We've seen 2 slot receivers in at once, 10 personnel package, 4 wide receivers, 5 wideouts. We see Cole Beasley lining up on the outside, Tavon Austin lining up on the outside, guys lining up on the outside and the inside, lining up everywhere. It's creativity. We've seen it throughout from the start of camp all the way through into the preseason, and we'll continue to see that. Obviously, calling plays in the regular season and those kinds of things, we'll have to wait to be seen. But certainly, people were asking for more creativity from the Cowboys offense, and we have seen it throughout the course of the last month that they've been in camp. Number 4 reason of 5 reasons for optimism here. Number 4, Jalen Smith, Sean Lee, Leighton Vander Esch, Joe Thomas, Damian Wilson. The offensive line is the best positional group on the Dallas Cowboys, but the linebackers have been the most impressive in the month of camp, especially because for the last 3-4 years, linebackers been a major liability for the Cowboys because they were so dependent on Sean Lee, who obviously has not been able to consistently stay healthy. He's a beast. There's no other way to say it. Sean Lee is a beast. He's the best linebacker, one of the best linebackers in the NFL when healthy. But the when healthy, obviously, is the big caveat of his career. Jalen Smith has been extremely impressive. I was, if you've listened back on previous episodes of the Cowboys Beat, I've always been more on the pessimistic side when it comes to Jalen Smith because he has come back from an injury that is unprecedented in modern medicine. 2 players in the history of the league have returned from this injury, and they weren't effective, and they were offensive linemen. Jalen Smith is attempting to do something that it shouldn't be being done. The fact that he's playing in and of itself is an unbelievable 30 for 30 narrative. But now that he's looking as good as he looks, people are trying to, is he back to what he was in Notre Dame? That's ridiculous. And the expectation that the guy that suffered severe nerve damage that might still have nerve damage, perhaps does not have full nerve regeneration. Who knows? We'll never know. He won't ever admit to it. He says he's got it fully, but I mean, that guy's not supposed to be an effective linebacker east-west, and he's moving well. It's an incredible story. Joe Thomas, after the first preseason game, he was the player of the week with his 5 tackles, tackle for loss, and interception in the game on the 105.3 The Fan and Dallas Cowboys Radio Network post-game show. The O-line's the best unit on the Dallas Cowboys. That's the offensive line is the best positional group on the Dallas Cowboys, and it's designed that way, and it's that good. But their linebackers are probably the second best unit on the team and have been the most impressive because you never would have expected that coming into the season. That's 4 reasons for optimism. Here's the 5th reason for optimism. Again, none of these in any particular order. If you're one of the Cowboys fans, and there's many of them, and perhaps most of them, if you don't like Jason Garrett as a head coach, if you think he's boring and bland and seems to be kind of like a coach who projects the aura of the coach that he'd like to be, if you think Jason Garrett hasn't evolved, adapted, grown within a game, within a season, if you don't like Jason Garrett as the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys and you want somebody new, well, then I've got good news for you. Because there's 2 outcomes for this season, right? There's making the playoffs and not making the playoffs. And making the playoffs makes you happy as a fan. Not making the playoffs normally wouldn't make you happy as a fan, but it would if you don't like Jason Garrett and not making the playoffs. It results in his being out of a job. Now, I know what Jerry Jones said at the beginning of training camp, but make no mistake, if Jason Garrett and the Dallas Cowboys fail to make the playoffs in 2018, he is not going to keep his job. So, maybe it's not necessarily a reason for optimism in 2018, but, I mean, it could be worse. The Cowboys could have gotten their way and traded up in the draft to take Paxton Lynch. Instead, they didn't. The Broncos did. And the Cowboys drafted Dak Prescott. I'm Ari Temkin. This is the Cowboys Beat on CLNS Media. Thank you, everybody, for checking out the podcast. Make sure to subscribe. Also, please help to improve the algorithm searchability of this podcast by rating the podcast. Give us a rating. Whether you like it or hate it, just give us a rating, and that'd be fantastic. Sorry for the abbreviated episode this week, but I'm going to have a loaded podcast next week with plenty of guests, including Cole Beasley, Joe Thomas, and we'll work on some other guys to get on the Cowboys Beat on next week's episode. If you're new to the podcast, you can also check me out on Twitter. I'm at Ari Sports, A-R-I Sports. Give me feedback, give me questions that I can answer. Also, I stream live every single day on Facebook and YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch with a network called Phantom, F-A-N-T-O-M. Go to facebook.com/WatchPhantom. I do a Cowboys stream every day at noon Central at facebook.com/WatchPhantom. And make sure to check out all the other great stuff going on along the CLNS Media platform. And again, thank you so much for checking out this episode. And thank you for listening, whether it be on the iTunes app, Stitcher, or on the CLNS Media app. But for now, I'm out. Peace.